over the world, people have argued among themselves about whose grandmother makes the best such and such dessert. In Greece, it's whose yaya makes the best baklava. In Russia, it's whose babushka whips up the best pastilla. In the American South, where I'm from, it might just be whose mima makes the best nanner pudding. The trouble with these friendly disputes, of course, is that there can never really be an objective winner. Every dutiful grandson or granddaughter will, if not for sheer loyalty, then at least for mere conditioning, always prefer their own grandma's culinary concoction. This preference will be built by a number of factors: the memories and sentiments it conjures, the familiarity principle, but the preference will be anything but objective. Even if a traitor to their own grandmother did find a foreign banana pudding more delectable, their preference would still be not objective but subjective, based on taste, an extremely personal, complicated internal symphony of physical stimuli, neural interpretation, conscious considerations involving intent and free will, unconscious activity mysteriously mingled into the mix, and possibly even some contribution from the spirit or metaphysical seat of the self. Subjectivity is simply the description of the way we as subjects perceive the world, including banana pudding. But not all things in the world are like banana pudding. Banana pudding, though loosely definable as a dessert tradition with common ingredients, presentation, culinary history, doesn't actually have a universal standard. There is no platonic form of banana pudding out there, of which all derivative banana puddings are imperfect examples. If that were the case, some banana pudding really could be better than others in an objective sense. But this dessert, like all folk recipes, is a changeable, evolving cultural artifact that never exists as a singular, self-referential thing. It's always relative to each mima. So my preference for it is a subjective perception of a relative thing. But what about other things, though, and the way I perceive them? Say, the color red. I'm still going to perceive it through physical, psychological, and maybe spiritual apparatuses, so it will still be a subjective experience. I, as a subject, experience red as you could never know. So our two subjective experiences of red are ultimately incomparable. We can even bring taste and preference into this example, as my favorite color may very well be red, while yours may be blue. But is red the same kind of thing as banana pudding? No, because the cultural freedom and creativity that allows banana pudding to be a relative phenomenon doesn't apply to color. Color, though potentially perceived in infinitely different ways in the complex symphonies known as our subjective perceptions, can nevertheless be accurately defined by the more objective means of measuring light wave frequencies. If two people looking at a rose had different subjective experiences of its color, a measurement of the frequency of light waves coming from the rose petal made from their position would empirically show that a very certain color was reflecting from that petal. Thus, color, as a description of light wave frequencies, is an objective thing, while banana pudding, as a recipe tradition, is a relative thing. So, to recap, we all have subjective experiences of everything we encounter, but those things we experience subjectively can be classified either as objective or relative things. Put in other terms, the essence of a thing either corresponds to an unchangeable truth or a movable reference point, usually of our own invention. The challenge, of course, is determining which kind of a thing a particular thing is. The fact that relative things generally reference something of our own design is a good clue. The ancient Greeks sometimes made this precise distinction using the terms physis, nature, and nomos, custom or convention. For example, the flow of traffic on a highway follows laws set up by people, drivers observing a speed limit and staying on the right side of a double yellow line. The flow of a river, on the other hand, obeys the laws of nature, its direction and boundaries governed by gravity. While motorists in the United States drive on the right side of the road, they equally could be driving on the left side if our custom, nomos, had dictated it. But a river's motion will always be what it is according to the reality of nature, physis. The laws of highways and rivers are easy to classify, but what about something like our law not to murder people? Is that merely a convention, if even a very practical one, for maintaining and preserving civilization? Or is it more than that, a recognition that killing people is inherently wrong, a violation against natural law? For most of history, it has tended to be only the professional philosophers that have been clever enough to delude themselves into thinking murder is anything but inherently wrong. But those clever philosophers do make a point. If some of our human laws, like don't murder, reflect natural law, physis, do all of them? And if not, which are which? We again find that there's trouble in deducing which things correspond to an objective reality and which are free to change relative to convention or custom. One reason we find it so difficult to agree on which laws, social behaviors, or human habits correspond to physis and which correspond to mere nomos is because we experience them all subjectively. When we compare our experiences of these things with each other, we find that we don't all experience them the same. A law that seems essentially and irreducibly basic to the truth of humanity for one person could feel superfluous and disposable to another. A matter of etiquette that feels profoundly important for this person may seem arbitrary or silly to the next. This barrier of subjectivity has made many people in our day despair of ever discovering the objective reality to which things correspond, if indeed there is any objective reality. The rejection of the idea that there's an objective reality to which anything corresponds is called relativism, and only in the last couple of centuries has it enjoyed any kind of widespread espousal. The Western crisis of where to find certainty in knowledge has undoubtedly prepared the hearts and minds of modern people to accept what I think is one of the most insidious errors anyone could make. The conclusion that differing subjective experiences of a thing means that the essence of that thing is ultimately relative to those different experiences. Everything then becomes like banana pudding. However you feel about it is right. Maybe it's this easy, frictionless neutrality that has encouraged our age to widely embrace relativism. It's just easier if we decide there is no universal reality to ethics or virtue or beauty or humanity. What's important or true or meaningful about all those things ultimately come from the individual and thus are relative to each of us. This idea, relativism, is by no means a recent invention. 2,400 years ago, Protagoras told us that man is the measure of all things. He, against Plato and the majority of people, thought that it's the individual or the collective culture that decides the value and the truth of each thing. But now, millennia later, our collective culture has decided it likes Protagoras' approach, breaking away from countless generations before us. For us now, whatever we happen to feel, to like or dislike about sex, family, relationships, art, nature, or 1,000 other things becomes unchallengeable because our perspectives are the measure of all things. What's true for banana pudding is true for all things. But we've already established that banana pudding is not like all things. Color can be objectively measured in light wave frequencies and therefore corresponds to an objective reality. If our different visions give us diverging impressions about whether an apple is red or green, one of us is colorblind and incorrect, or at least less close to the truth. And most people throughout most of time agreed that most things in the universe were like color, corresponding to an objective reality. And like our vision senses the objectivity of color, to greater or lesser degrees, we have other faculties that should be sensing the objective transcendental reality of other things, their goodness, truth, and beauty. Until quite modern times, writes C.S. Lewis, all teachers and even all men believe the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. In other words, things in this universe have an objective reality to them that we can sense with our faculties, sight, smell, touch, etc., but also other faculties like what we might call intuition, what the medievals called intellectus and the Greeks called nous. These faculties can, to greater or lesser degrees, both apprehend things and inform our judgments of them against an objective standard. Those faculties can even be trained and honed based on the understanding that there's something real to hone them on. This is what St. Augustine called ordo amoris. C.S. Lewis defined this as the ordinate condition of the affections in which every object is accorded that kind or degree of love which is appropriate to it. Lewis continues, Aristotle says the main aim of education is to make the pupil like or dislike what he ought. When the age for reflective thought comes, the pupil who has thus been trained in ordinate affections or just sentiments will easily find the first principles in ethics. But to the corrupt man, they will never be visible at all, and he can make no progress in that science. Plato before him had said the same. This conception in all its forms, Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, Christian, and Oriental alike, will seem perhaps to many of you merely quaint or even magical. But what is common to them all is something we cannot neglect. It is the doctrine of objective value. The belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. Those who know objective value can hold that to call children delightful or old men venerable is not simply to record a psychological fact about our own parental or filial emotions at the moment, but to recognize a quality which demands a certain response from us, whether we make it or not. And because our approvals and disapprovals are thus recognitions of objective value or responses to an objective order, therefore emotional states can be in harmony with reason when we feel liking for what ought to be approved, or out of harmony with reason when we perceive that liking is due but cannot feel it. This momentous assertion at the heart of Lewis's opening essay in The Abolition of Man is diametrically opposed to the now fashionable supposition that there is no such thing as objective value, and thus no ultimate goodness, rightness, meetness, or fairness in the world, but only what we happen to legislate for ourselves. The idea that a value judgment could be true in any objective sense is now heresy to the relativist. The idea that a feeling could be incongruous with reality is itself incongruous with the doctrine of the relativist. But humanity's greatest thinkers, from ancient Greece to the Far East, to deep India, to Byzantium, to Western Christendom, have all shared the belief in objective value. Despite their obvious differences in other very fundamental beliefs about the world, creation, our origins, and God, they all believed that there were ways of living, behaving, appreciating things, and creating things that were appropriate or inappropriate, harmonious or discordant with reality. Ironically, many modern disbelievers in objective value would cite that very same diversity of traditions as one of their causes for disbelieving. They miss the monumental similarity in that all the traditions believe in objective value and instead trip over their differences. How could anyone confidently believe in the truth of one tradition, they reckon, when we now know there are so many competing beliefs out there? Someone once asked G.K. Chesterton how he could believe his own philosophy was correct when there were so many other competing philosophies. "It is perpetually said," replied Mr. Chesterton, "that because there are 100 religions claiming to be true, it is therefore impossible that one of them should really be true. It would be as reasonable to say that because some people thought the earth was flat, and others, rather less incorrectly, imagined it was round, and because anybody is free to say that it is triangular or hexagonal or a rhomboid, therefore it has no shape at all, or its shape can never be discovered, and anyhow modern science must be wrong in saying it is an oblate spheroid. The world must be some shape, and it must be that shape and no other. And it is not self-evident that nobody can possibly hit on the right one. What so obviously applies to the material shape of the world equally applies to the moral shape of the universe." Instead of thinking there is no real moral shape of the universe because different people think it's shaped differently, the wisest thinkers throughout time, realizing that these different people were all searching for truth based on their shared conviction that truth is discoverable, have instead tried to discover the truth for themselves. Instead of thinking there is no true value to the beauty of a waterfall, or the sanctity of marriage, or the responsibility to parents, neighbors, and country, or even simply the existence of a human life, merely because some people value them differently, the wisest people have always instead sought to know their true value anyway. Maybe the truth will be sought through intense thought and meditation, or by amalgamating many different perspectives, or by seeking out the wisdom of elders, or through convinced metaphysical revelation. In any case, the conviction that real value, a real answer, was there to be discovered, remained. The widespread relativizing of value in our culture today disregards this historic and widespread conviction that our behavior, our estimations of beauty and goodness, can truly be more or less in line with an objective reality. If there's any respect for, or even calculated consideration of, the vast majority of people who have lived and experienced life before us, if there's any democracy for the dead, then we would do well to consider what nearly all of them agreed on. There's as much of an objective reality to goodness, truth, and beauty as there is to physical laws, maybe more. And we have the capacity to discover that reality and to learn of it from others already better acquainted with it, if we make the effort. By all means, let's agree to disagree about banana pudding, but about the objectivity of value for other things in the universe, of their goodness, truth, and beauty, let's work to discover it and to bring ourselves into harmony and conformity with it. Because even if differences among us remain due to our subjective experiences differing in our perception of the world, we will at least be united on that broad, shared ground of recognizing the objectivity of value and the goodness of conforming to it. And who could argue against the goodness of more unity in this increasingly fractured world? Hi, thank you so much for watching. If you made it through this whole video, then I'm guessing the big subjects, philosophy, metaphysics, morality, faith, are things you're interested in. These are the kinds of things I try to cover on this channel, so if you'd like to see and hear more from me, please hit subscribe and check out some of my other videos, and like, share, and comment on them too if you feel like it. I'd love to hear from you and what you think. And remember, the one world story wouldn't be complete without your storyline in it, so live it well. God bless you.